Story 1. The Midnight Express. It was a Tuesday night, late October, and the city was already settling into its cold, damp routine. I was 23, working a graveyard shift at a data entry firm downtown, and my commute home always involved the last train out of the central station. It was usually empty, just a few tired souls, and I preferred it that way. The silence was a welcome change from the fluorescent hum of the office. This particular night, the train pulled into the station at 1:17 a.m., precisely on schedule. I boarded the second-to-last car, my usual spot, and settled into a window seat. The train was, as expected, deserted, or so I thought. As the doors hissed shut, I noticed a figure at the very end of the car, hunched over, almost blending into the shadows. They were wearing a dark, oversized hoodie, and their head was bowed, obscuring their face. I didn't think much of it. Late-night commuters often looked like that. The train began its rhythmic sway, picking up speed. The city lights blurred outside, and I found myself drifting, half asleep. Then, a sound. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching. It was coming from the direction of the hooded figure. I opened my eyes, trying to pinpoint the source. It sounded like fingernails dragging across glass, but softer, more insistent. I dismissed it as the train settling, or perhaps a loose panel. The scratching continued, growing slightly louder, more deliberate. It had a rhythm now, a slow, uneven cadence. I glanced back at the figure. They hadn't moved. Their posture was still the same, a dark silhouette against the faint emergency lighting. A shiver ran down my spine. It was too regular to be random train noise. It was almost a message. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages. But really, I was using the screen's reflection to get a better look. The figure was still motionless. The scratching, however, was now accompanied by a faint, guttural hum. It was low, almost a vibration, and it seemed to resonate through the floor of the train car. My heart started to pound. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a tired commuter. The train was approaching my stop, the next one. I started gathering my things, my movements stiff and unnatural. The scratching intensified, becoming frantic, like something trapped and desperate. The humming grew louder, a low growl now, and I could feel the vibrations in my teeth. I risked another glance. The figure was still hunched, but I could see a slight tremor in their shoulders. And then, a faint, sickly sweet smell, like old meat and something metallic, began to fill the air. The train screeched to a halt at my station. The doors opened with a sigh. I practically leaped out, not daring to look back. As I stood on the platform, gasping for breath, I heard it. A loud, wet thud from inside the train car, followed by a chilling, drawn-out moan. The doors began to close. Through the narrowing gap, I saw it. The hooded figure was no longer hunched. They were standing, facing the window, their back to me. And on the window, smeared across the glass, were 5 distinct, bloody claw marks, each one ending in a jagged, torn fingernail. The train pulled away, and I was left alone on the platform, the metallic scent still clinging to the cold night air. I never took the last train again. After that night, the memory of those claw marks and the chilling thud stayed with me. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but the metallic scent, the one that had filled the train car, lingered in my nostrils for days, a phantom smell that no amount of scrubbing could remove. I started taking an earlier train, one that was always bustling with people, even if it meant sacrificing an hour of sleep. The thought of being alone in that empty car, with only the rhythmic sway and the potential for something unseen, was enough to make my stomach churn. One evening, a few weeks later, I was scrolling through local news forums, trying to distract myself. I stumbled upon a small, almost overlooked article. It was about a missing person, a man in his late 40s. who had last been seen boarding the midnight express from the central station. The article mentioned he was a night shift worker, just like me. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The police had found no leads, no signs of foul play, just a missing person report that would likely go cold. They mentioned a strange unidentifiable residue found on one of the train car windows, but dismissed it as industrial grease. I knew better. I knew what it was. It was the same metallic scent, the same residue that had clung to my clothes. I never reported what I saw. Who would believe me? A tired data entry clerk, claiming to have seen claw marks and heard guttural hums on a deserted train. They'd think I was crazy. But every time I hear the distant rumble of a train at night, I still feel that icy dread. And I wonder if anyone else has seen the figure in the dark hoodie, or heard the scratching that signals something truly horrifying is about to unfold. Story 2. The Bus Stop Shadow. I was 19. A college student living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. My classes often ran late, and the bus was my only way home after dark. This particular night, it was raining, a cold, persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into your bones. The bus stop was dimly lit, just a single flickering street lamp, casting long, dancing shadows. It was around 11 p.m., and I was the only one there. I pulled my jacket tighter, trying to ward off the chill. The bus was due in 10 minutes, according to the app on my phone. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, but otherwise, the street was eerily quiet. As I waited, I noticed a shadow detach itself from the deeper darkness across the street. It was tall, thin, and moved with an unnatural fluidity, almost gliding. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was too indistinct, too formless. My breath hitched. I told myself it was just the rain, playing tricks with the light, or my tired eyes. But the shadow kept moving, slowly, deliberately, towards my side of the street. It didn't seem to have any discernible features, just a darker patch against the already dark night. It felt like a void, a place where light simply ceased to exist. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to unlock it. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but my mind was a blank. The shadow was now directly across from me, on the other side of the road. It stopped, and for a moment, it seemed to grow, stretching upwards, its edges blurring into the rain. I could feel a cold dread creeping up my spine, a primal fear that had nothing to do with logic or reason. Then, I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible whisper, carried on the wind. It was my name. Not shouted, not even spoken, but breathed, a soft sibilant sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that whatever this was, it knew me. It had been waiting for me. Just then, the headlights of the bus appeared in the distance, a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. I didn't wait for it to stop completely. As it slowed, I practically threw myself through the doors, scrambling to the nearest empty seat. I risked a glance back through the rain-streaked window. The shadow was gone. The street was empty, save for the flickering street lamp and the relentless rain. But as the bus pulled away, I felt a distinct, icy pressure on my shoulder, as if an unseen hand had just rested there. I spent the rest of the ride home huddled in my seat, staring straight ahead, convinced that something had followed me, something that was still very, very close. The encounter at the bus stop left me shaken. For days, every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every rustle of leaves sounded like that faint whisper. I started avoiding that particular bus stop, opting for a longer walk to a more populated one, even in the rain. I told my roommate about it, trying to make light of it, but the tremor in my voice betrayed my fear. She laughed it off, suggesting I was just overtired and imagining things. But she hadn't felt that icy pressure on her shoulder, hadn't heard her name breathed from the darkness. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, I was walking home from the library. It was still early, the sun just beginning to set, casting long, playful shadows. As I turned onto my street, I saw it again. Not the full, indistinct form, but a ripple in the air, a distortion in the light, just at the edge of my vision. It was standing near the old oak tree at the corner, where the streetlights didn't quite reach. It wasn't moving, just observing. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't. It felt like I was caught in a spotlight, every move scrutinized. I forced myself to walk, slowly, deliberately, keeping my eyes fixed on the ground. I could feel its presence, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me. As I passed the tree, I risked a quick glance. It was still there, a darker patch against the fading light, its form still indistinct, but somehow more defined. I could almost make out the suggestion of a head, tilted slightly, as if in curiosity. I hurried the rest of the way home, fumbling with my keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I slammed it shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for breath. I knew then that it wasn't a one-time hallucination. It was real, and it was still out there, waiting in the shadows, perhaps for me, perhaps for someone else. The thought still sends a shiver down my spine, every time I see a shadow that's just a little too dark, a little too still. Story 3. The Subway Stare. I'm 28, and I've been taking the subway to work for the past 5 years. It's a necessary evil, a cramped, noisy, and often smelly part of my daily routine. Most days, I zone out, listening to podcasts or reading. But one morning, about 6 months ago, something broke that routine, and it's been haunting me ever since. It was a typical Monday, rush hour. The train was packed, bodies pressed against each other, a symphony of coughs and muttered apologies. I managed to snag a standing spot near the doors, gripping the overhead bar. Across from me, squeezed between a businessman and a student, was a woman. She was unremarkable at first glance, plain clothes, average height, dark hair, pulled back, in a messy bun. But then I noticed her eyes. They were wide, unblinking, and fixed directly on me. I tried to ignore it. People stare on the subway. It happens. I shifted my weight, pretended to be engrossed in the advertisements above the doors. But when I subtly glanced back, her gaze hadn't wavered. It was intense, almost predatory. There was no malice in it, no anger, just an unnerving, unwavering focus. It felt less like she was looking at me, and more like she was looking through me, or perhaps into me. My stop was still several stations away. The train rattled on, the fluorescent lights flickering. The woman's stare began to feel heavy, a physical weight. I could feel the hairs on my arms prickle. I tried to meet her gaze, to break the spell, but her eyes were like black holes, absorbing everything. I started to feel a strange disorientation, a subtle blurring of the edges of my vision. The sounds of the train, the chatter of the passengers, all seemed to recede, replaced by a low hum that seemed to emanate from her. At the next station, a few people exited, and the crowd shifted. I thought about moving, but I felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by her gaze. Her lips, thin and pale, began to move almost imperceptibly. No sound came out, but I could almost feel the words, a silent whisper, directly into my mind. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the feeling it conveyed was clear, a profound, ancient sorrow, and an insatiable hunger. My stop finally arrived. The doors opened, and I stumbled out, my legs feeling like jelly. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked quickly, almost ran, up the stairs, and out into the street, gulping in the fresh, cold air. I told myself it was just a strange woman, a trick of the light, my imagination. But for weeks after, every time I stepped onto the subway, I felt a phantom weight on my shoulders, and the distinct sensation of being watched. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I still hear that silent whisper. a language of sorrow and hunger, echoing in the back of my mind. That morning on the subway, the woman's stare had left an indelible mark. For days, I felt a phantom pressure on my temples, as if her gaze was still boring into my skull. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just a strange encounter, a product of my overactive imagination. But the memory of her unblinking eyes, and that silent, sorrowful whisper, clung to me like a shroud. I started taking different routes to work, walking further to avoid that particular subway line, even though it added 20 minutes to my commute. The thought of seeing her again, of feeling that profound, ancient hunger directed at me, was unbearable. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I was in a crowded coffee shop, trying to focus on a report. The low hum of conversation, the clatter of cups, it was all a comforting normalcy. Then, I felt it. That familiar, unsettling sensation of being watched. My heart leaped into my throat. I slowly, cautiously, raised my head. And there she was, sitting at a small table by the window, sipping a latte, her eyes fixed on me. She was dressed differently, in a bright red coat, but there was no mistaking those eyes. They were still wide, still unblinking, still black holes that seemed to swallow the light. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag, spilling some of my coffee in the process, and practically ran out of the shop. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my pace quickening with every step, until I was several blocks away. I ducked into a small bookstore, pretending to browse, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stayed there for an hour, hiding among the shelves, before finally venturing out. I never saw her again, not in person. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still feel that intense, unwavering gaze, and I hear that silent, sorrowful whisper, a language of profound sadness and insatiable hunger, echoing in the deepest corners of my mind. It's a reminder that some things, once seen, can never be unseen, and some connections, once made, can never be truly broken. Story 4. The Ghost in the Taxi. It was a torrential downpour, the kind where the rain comes down in sheets, and the city lights blur into a watery haze. I was out late, celebrating a friend's birthday, and after a few too many drinks, I decided to take a taxi home instead of braving the bus. It was past 2 a.m., and finding a cab was proving difficult. Finally, a yellow light appeared through the deluge, and a beat-up old sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver was a man in his late 50s, with tired eyes and a perpetually slumped posture. The interior of the car smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and something metallic, like old coins. I gave him my address, and we set off, the wipers struggling against the onslaught of rain. The ride was quiet, save for the drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional splash as we hit a puddle. About halfway home, I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. There was a passenger in the back seat, behind the driver. I hadn't seen anyone get in. It was a woman, dressed in what looked like a vintage white dress, her hair long and dark, obscuring most of her face. She was completely still, almost rigid. I assumed she was another fare, maybe someone he'd picked up before me, but that didn't make sense. Why would she be sitting there silently, and why hadn't I noticed her? I tried to catch the driver's eye in the mirror, to ask about her, but he seemed focused on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The air in the car grew noticeably colder, despite the humid night. I could see my breath in front of me. The metallic smell intensified, now mixed with something else, something sweet and cloying, like lilies. I glanced back at the woman. Her head was still bowed, but I could see a faint, almost translucent glow emanating from her. It was subtle, like moonlight filtering through water. And then, a sound, a soft, mournful sigh, barely audible above the rain. It seemed to come from her, a sound of profound sadness and endless waiting. My heart began to race. This wasn't right. This wasn't a normal passenger. I gripped the door handle, my hands slick with sweat. I wanted to tell the driver to stop, to let me out, but the words caught in my throat. The woman in the back seat, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to lift her head. I could see the outline of her face now, pale and indistinct, like a faded photograph. Just as her eyes were about to meet mine in the mirror, the taxi swerved violently, narrowly missing a parked car. The driver cursed under his breath, and the sudden jolt broke the spell. I looked back, and the back seat was empty. The cold dissipated, and the metallic, floral scent faded. I stared at the empty seat, then at the driver, who was now muttering about reckless drivers. We arrived at my building a few minutes later. I paid the fare, my hands still shaking, and got out as quickly as I could. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the empty back seat, but then, for a split second, I saw it. A faint, shimmering outline of a woman, her head bowed, her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, sitting exactly where she had been. The taxi disappeared into the rainy night, leaving me on the curb. The image burned into my mind. I never took a taxi alone after dark again, and to this day, the smell of lilies makes my blood run cold. The image of the woman in the taxi, her faint, shimmering outline, haunted my dreams for weeks. The smell of lilies, once a pleasant fragrance, now triggered a wave of nausea and dread. I found myself avoiding taxis, preferring to walk, even in bad weather, or relying on ride-sharing apps where I could see the driver's details and the car's license plate. The anonymity of a random taxi, the enclosed space, had become a source of profound unease.